at the federal level, it's failed at the state level, it's failed at the local level, and the result, even if you take DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration's numbers, which are far lower than those of Representative Dickerson's, if you took 14 million Americans who regularly smoke marijuana, the proceeds from those sales are enormous. DEA estimates that 60 to 80% of the income of Mexican and international drug cartels is derived from the American marijuana black market. So the existence of that black market poses a threat. And what's the threat? The threat is every time a police officer has to arrest someone for marijuana, they're put their life on the line. If you look at what happens, as I know, Mr. Chairman, you and committee members are well aware of what's happening along our southwest border with Mexico. When a pit is open and bodies are found inside, we have to consider that, in part, it is our failed governmental policy that's resulted in that. That is the exploitation of the black market by criminals. I want to conclude my remarks by pointing out that addressing that is in large part a federal concern and not a state concern. And it is simply this: no matter what you do, so long as the federal government continues to criminalize all aspects of marijuana, whether you have a prescription or whatever comes of House Bill 1550, it would be simultaneously legal and illegal to smoke marijuana, whether you have a prescription and you are completely complying with state law, and that is a fact. And I would suggest that that is a failure in government, that can simultaneously be true for our citizens. That means that there has to be concordance on these policies, and Congress, the United States Congress, has to act as well. I do think that it's incumbent upon state legislatures to consider the failure in prohibition and to consider what their responsibility is to act. Taxation, just a note of caution, marijuana is an easily growable commodity. If marijuana is overtaxed, it's simply going to go back underground. So I question the idea that massive dollars are available to states, at least initially. I also question the law enforcement savings, because once you regulate and tax and decriminalize parts of marijuana, it's going to be run by organized crime for a time, and it's going to take significant law enforcement assets to disrupt that kind of organized crime. So thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Chairman Hunter and members of the committee, my name is Tim Burgess. I'm a member of the Seattle City Council, and I chair our council's Public Safety and Education Committee. I favor the legislation that is before you because I want to see a more rational, predictable, and cost-effective response to drug use and crime in our communities. Continuing to prohibit adult possession and use of small amounts of cannabis, and then using our police officers and the powers of the criminal justice system to enforce this prohibition is not rational, and it is not cost-effective. Because of time, I'm going to skip to the end of my statement. The segments that I'm leaving out link this issue to America's problem that has been around for decades of mass incarceration and the problems that that's causing in American society, including here in Washington State. But because of time, I want to address some of the objections and the fears around this measure. And I'll share a few statistics from my city, Seattle. In 2003, Seattle voters, through an initiative, directed that the simple possession of marijuana be the lowest priority of our police department. Last year, City Attorney Pete Holmes, who's here with us today, stopped all prosecutions of simple possession of marijuana. And you know what? The sky has not fallen in Seattle. Reported major crime continues to decline. Our Part 1 offenses, which are the most serious crimes, are at 40-year lows. Our misdemeanor bookings into the King County Jail have declined 47%, saving the city nearly $17 million in jail booking fees alone. These facts, I believe, give us solid evidence that alternative approaches to crime and incarceration, including this alternative, can be effective to keep our people and our neighborhoods safe. So the legislation before you today calls for a significant change, and this change does cause concern to many people, and I recognize that. But this is exactly the kind of discussion we should be having among ourselves, because continuing excuse me, continuing our present course is not sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there brief questions? Been well briefed. Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll move to, let's see, we'll do it in this order. George Rohrbacher. I'm sorry, I want to get this right. Mary Lou, is that the right order? Which one do you want me to do? They're going to go to the last one. So you want me to do panel 2? Okay. So we'll go to panel 2. Jody Emery, Philip Tavel, Dr. Craig Reinerman. And Dr. Reinerman, I understand, will be joining us by phone. So again, we'll have 10 minutes for the panel. And there we go.
My name is Jody Emery, and I am here from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And it is a place where cannabis is tolerated, as many of you may know. And that has led to a safer environment for people to use and to grow cannabis. And that tolerance also allows for businesses related to cannabis to operate transparently and contribute to the economy through employment and tax revenue. I run a store in downtown Vancouver that employs over 20 people. We pay property taxes, sales taxes, payroll taxes, and we sell hemp clothing, hemp accessories, books, magazines, novelties. We don't sell cannabis, so that's not at all involved. But the fact that we're able to be so successful and to contribute so much to the community just in a business that relates to cannabis, I think says a lot. The business was actually started by my husband, Mark Emery, in 1994, and he started selling cannabis seeds through the mail. He contributed taxes on that through his own personal income tax, through sales tax, property tax, and all the rest of it. And he was actually indicted here in Washington State in 2005 for conspiracy to distribute the marijuana seeds, and he was extradited last year and is currently serving a 5-year sentence down in Georgia, a plea deal that he took. I think it's obvious to say that if your loved one is taken away and imprisoned, it leaves an enormous void in your life. I struggle with loneliness. I struggle without him being there. I worry about his safety, and that has caused a lot of harm to me and to all of his family and loved ones, and he has hurt nobody. And he's just one of hundreds of thousands of people across America who have lost family members and friends, not only to the prison system where they're not able to contribute to society, but the money spent on imprisoning them could have been used in much better ways to help through society's programs, health services, anything else like that, instead of locking them up. So I do believe that the harms caused by prohibition are actually too costly to continue any further, and it actually diverts money and resources away from healthcare and services and prevents the growth of a very viable, profitable industry in both cannabis and hemp production. So we need to bring that money into the legitimate economy, take it away from the gangs, take it away from organized crime, and allow people to operate openly, transparently, pay their taxes, contribute to society, and that would very much help out. So I support and thank Ms. Dixon for having me here.
Hi, Chairman Hunter, members of the committee. My name is Philip Tavel. I've been a public defender for about 6 years in King County. In that time, I've dealt with, maybe nearly 3,000 cases. And what's interesting is when I take a look at the people that were arrested for possession of marijuana or possession of drug paraphernalia, I never see people who are involved in violent activities. I never see people who are hurting other people or are disruptive. It's almost always, of those 3,000 or so cases, about 200 have involved marijuana in simple possession. I have never had one that involved someone who's involved in assault or a domestic violence incident. The ones that I had that involved driving under the influence of marijuana, unlike the alcohol cases, it was usually someone driving a little too slow or a little too fast, and they were pulled over for that. In some situations, I've had police officers just take flakes of marijuana from a floorboard to have enough to process, but that there was nothing else wrong with the person's driving other than going a little too slow or a little too fast. I think the point that's important to make is that when I look and see the time that goes into the police officers who arrest these people, they're then arrested, they're booked, they take time, they're spent in jail, sometimes they have to bail out. They then have to come to court 3, 4, 5 times. Each time they do that, they're taking off of work, they're taking off of school, they're having to find childcare, or they're just having to make excuses with their life to deal with this. And I've had several cases where people have lost their jobs because of the time they've had to deal with this. A couple of cases, in fact, where people were found with marijuana at the airport when they were boarding on airplanes, just with a little bit of marijuana that they may or may not have remembered was in that bag. And they end up having to deal with a lot of time and money lost. For the most part, prosecutors, if people don't have any past record, are willing to make some kind of a deal where they do community service and pay a fine and it's dismissed at a later date. But still, the amount of time and effort that goes into dealing with these cases is very difficult. And I would just say it's an important thing to look at, that it should be treated the same as alcohol. It should be regulated, and it should not be illegal any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have Dr. Reinerman on the phone.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Oh, I always love it when it works.
Yes,
Yes, and Dr. Reinerman is the chairman of the sociology department at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Did I get that right?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. You're on.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some testimony. I'm aware, I was asked specifically to summarize the research evidence on the question of the potential impact of your bill on the prevalence of cannabis use by young people. I'm aware of 4 kinds of research that bear on that question. First is the Dutch experience. As you probably know, since the 1980s, the Netherlands has been the only country in the world that allows the lawful regulated sale of cannabis. There are several hundred coffee shops, as they're called, across the country that are licensed and regulated, taxed by the government for retail sales of small amounts of cannabis to people over age 18. In 2005, for example, 22.6% of Dutch people over the age of 12 reported lifetime prevalence of cannabis use, meaning they tried it at least once. 5.4% reported that they used it in the past year. In the U.S., by contrast, 41% of Americans 12 and over reported lifetime prevalence of marijuana, and 10% reported last year prevalence, which is roughly double the Dutch rates. Now, my own research on career use patterns funded by the National Institute of Drug Abuse also found lower rates of use in representative samples of experienced users in Amsterdam than comparable samples in San Francisco. Users in both cities started using at exactly the same age, 17, and we found no evidence that the ease of lawful availability in Amsterdam led to younger average age of onset there. So despite 3 decades of lawful sale of cannabis, Dutch prevalence rates have pretty much remained half of those in the U.S. and pretty much in the middle of the pack in comparable European societies. Second kind of evidence is U.S. experience with 11 states that decriminalized or moved in that direction significantly in the 1970s. There were 3 studies, all of them found the same thing. One was at the University of Michigan by the people who do the Monitoring the Future surveys every year. They found no evidence that cannabis use had increased or started younger in the decriminalized states than in neighboring states that had not decriminalized. Same was true for a study by Dr. Eric Singal, who's at Canada's Addiction Research Foundation and a professor at the University of Toronto. He too found no evidence of increased use or related problems. And the third was by Dr. Deborah Maloff, National Research Council of the National Academy of Sciences, and she found no increase in cannabis use among young people in those states that had decriminalized compared to neighboring states that had not. The third, briefly, is the Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University in New York, well-known drug abuse prevention group, have surveyed for 14 years about 1,000 teenagers about drug use, licit and illicit, and among their questions is one that asks these students how easy or difficult it is for them